Welcome to CharityVillage Connects. In this episode, we're talking about post-pandemic fundraising and beyond, innovations in how nonprofits raise money and engage donors. With the COVID-19 pandemic continuing to dramatically impact many traditional fundraising events, Canadian nonprofits are having to find new ways to raise much-needed operating funds. I'm delighted to welcome Ruth MacKenzie, the CEO and President of the Canadian Association of Gift Planners, to talk about the innovations in fundraising that we're seeing in the nonprofit sector in Canada. Welcome, Ruth.
Thank you, Mary. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, I'd like to take you back to the beginning of the pandemic. We saw that the continued lockdowns were having a truly devastating effect on the ability of a lot of nonprofits and charities to fundraise. I'd like to find out from your perspective what you saw the sector was facing, what you observed as the leader of the Canadian Association of Gift Planners.
Well, that's such a great question. And, it feels like it was very long ago, but it also feels like it was just last week. And what a ride the last 18 months or so has been. I think, thinking back to that time, there were so many challenges that charities were facing, and largely because of the uncertainty of it all. I think more recently we've kind of settled into this as, I don't want to say the new normal, but certainly the normal that we're living with right now. For us at CAGP, because we focus on strategic planning or strategic philanthropy rather, and planned giving, the donor discussions are really very long-term and very future-oriented. So it's a different context for us than for other kinds of fundraising that we might be more current or immediate. And where bequests or estate gifts are very much the focus on planned giving for many organizations, that the pandemic was really not the time to fundraise. Rather, it was an opportunity to use some of the lingo for the day to double down on something that's fundamental to gift planning, and that's donor relations. It was an incredible opportunity for charities to just reach out to their donors, to check in a genuine and authentic way and see how they are, and to let them know how you're doing, because they're your donors. They're thinking about you, and just to engage them in a conversation about your organization, because they're your donors. They care, right? And we saw a lot of organizations doing that in our various webinars and education events that CAGP was offering around that time. That was a really strong message that we conveyed. Maybe just press pause on things, but use that time to connect with your donors. And interestingly, and there's evidence of this, incidence of planned giving actually increases during a time of crisis. That's a time when people are perhaps thinking about their mortality, they're reflecting on their community, and in many cases, creating or updating their wills. I know I certainly did. Well, connecting with your donors at that time when that's on their mind definitely demonstrates, or it's an opportunity really to demonstrate an alignment between personal values and personal giving, and for your charity to be part of that conversation. So I think it presented some real opportunities for us in the sector to just, again, connect with our donors in a genuine way.
That's a really fascinating observation, and one that's quite intuitive, that in any crisis, especially one that's as deadly as a pandemic, that one would think about one's own will and planning for the future and for dependents. And you actually saw an increase in terms of the number of people creating wills and doing some planning with regards to that. I understand there's sort of numbers around that.
I don't have the numbers right at my fingertips, Mary, but definitely the more anecdotal evidence that we heard from our members that are doing estate plans is that people were updating and writing wills at really unprecedented levels. I mean, it was such a scary time, really, particularly in the early days. So yeah, we saw that a lot, at least anecdotally. There's been some research out of the US, not so much right now, but in previous times of disruption or crisis, where people indicated that they were including gifts in their wills at a higher rate as well.
I would have thought that in many respects, some of the in-person events and all of the shutdowns impacting that kind of giving, that in many respects, thinking of planned giving might have greater precedence in a person's mind if they were still wanting to engage with the missions and the causes that they cared about. Did you have any sort of experience in relation to seeing that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think gift planning as a construct is very thoughtful and methodical and strategic. And so when you're reflecting and you're thinking about the future, I think that that's something that we see a lot of. And I think, while a lot of charities really amped up their online fundraising, I think, this also shone a spotlight that there's a big digital gap for many charities. And we saw a lot of people pivoting and increasing their comfort with digital technology. And I think really it's about using digital to connect in a meaningful way with donors over Zoom or other virtual platforms. So yeah, I think we did see a lot of that for sure.
Can you give us some real world examples of some of the recent changes in fundraising that you actually saw from your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, these are trends that have maybe been around a little while, but, more recently we've been seeing a lot of indication that people are perhaps interested, and this is maybe particularly younger people, interested in connecting with causes more so than to particular charities. Another trend is that we're seeing that there's fewer donors but that they're giving more. But what's concerning is that intergenerational transfer of wealth. It's significant, but that's an older generation of giving, and that often happens through strategic giving tools. So that's an opportunity for us at CAGP to promote things like giving through property or insurance or securities. But I think the other thing that I might want to add is that rather than changing to fundraising per se, I'd like to highlight some of the changes that are more in the context of philanthropy as a construct and issues that are impacting philanthropy. So things like increasing recognition, as I said, of asset-based giving and the increase that we're seeing in people who are giving through their assets, such as stock or real estate, and how those mechanisms are increasingly used to facilitate philanthropic giving. I mean, another issue that I would say has really, really come to light over the course of the pandemic is the concentration of wealth. And that's both an opportunity for people who are wealthier to give more, but it's also created some real questions and concerns about how that wealth concentration happens, and more importantly, who's left behind. And how is that impacting philanthropy and those who are recipients of philanthropic giving? We also have an aging society, and I mentioned that that's a cohort that's giving more, but it's creating real concern about the future because we're not seeing younger people give to the same level or even in the same way. And I'm talking here about things like GoFundMe and the increasing prevalence of that. I think maybe on the positive side, I believe there is a greater awareness of philanthropy and how it contributes to society and to the greater good. I think there's a lot more professional resources and options that support fundraising and charitable giving, donor advised funds, or perhaps setting up a fund at a community foundation. And I think what's exciting there is that we're seeing more and more often, particularly in some community foundations, that those mechanisms are not just for the very wealthy, but they're small amounts of funding that can be built over a period of time. And that's a really great opportunity to facilitate a future generation of philanthropy and philanthropists. And of course, tax incentives, particularly when you're giving from assets, you get a tax incentive anytime you give, but there are often added incentives around giving from your assets. And we have the most favorable tax system in the world when it comes to incentivizing and amplifying charitable giving. And so, it's just a great opportunity and a real trend that we're seeing on the increase.
So it sounds like planned giving and philanthropy generally is going through some real transformational changes that I guess, traditional fundraising that we think of is as well during this pandemic. Would you agree with that? And how is that impacting the work that you do?
Let's see. I think it's impacting. I definitely agree with the statement for sure. I think it's impacting us and our work in a lot of ways. Again, I'd maybe to take a step back and speak about philanthropy versus fundraising. I think a real spotlight has been shone on inequity and social justice, and philanthropy has a huge opportunity to be a catalyst for systemic change, and that's something we're thinking about and unpacking a lot at CAGP. But it's also more marginalized communities that are demanding this, and the colonialist construct and context of charity can be seriously disrupted. And I think the notion of white saviorism is one that's no longer acceptable. And I think that's a point that I really wanted to bring forward in our conversation today, that diverse voices are intrinsically part of the equation, especially where philanthropy is used as a mechanism to resolve social change. And there's huge opportunities as well for CAGP, but also for grant makers to address these systemic and institutional racism that we're seeing is so prevalent, by supporting and working with Black, Indigenous, and other racialized communities to ensure that granting happens in a way that's equitable, because there's some shocking statistics that is showing that's not been the case. So it really requires listening, relationship building, respect, but more importantly, and this is the big challenge, it requires that those who are in the traditional power position to take a step back and to make some room. And so those are a lot of things that I would say at 10,000 feet maybe are really impacting what we're doing at CAGP.
That's really such an important aspect of what we're seeing throughout many aspects of the nonprofit sector, for sure. Does that impact strategies for gift planning or philanthropy generally in that regard that the sector should know more about?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there are some real movements afoot to get more people who are engaged in more mainstream philanthropy to be thinking along those ways, and thinking about how they're supporting community and who they're connecting with in community. And importantly, does their organization reflect their community? And I think that's critically important and much more front of center of people's minds than perhaps it was before.
I'd like to talk about, I guess you did address this off the top of our conversation, about the pandemic being an opportunity, particularly in those long-term relationships that gift planning professionals have with their clients, about the opportunity to sort of reach out and maintain donors in those relationships. Could you talk about the challenges that the pandemic brought and the opportunities as well?
The pandemic, gave a real opportunity to connect with donors in real and meaningful ways. And I'm talking about connecting around the why of giving, and that's the connection between philanthropy and community. And philanthropy is the spirit of generosity. So I think it's also important to remember that the pandemic shone a spotlight on this, and that donors are not a homogeneous group. They are diverse in many ways. And so it's really important to examine where in your organization you're communicating well with donors, but also where your communication may be lacking. And what is that changing landscape in Canada, and where does that intersect with your donors and your organization? I mean, the other thing I would say, and I'm sure you've heard this many, many times, about how important storytelling is in connecting with donors. And it's an incredibly compelling way to connect with donors. All your audiences really, and the pandemic's created some incredible stories of challenges and about fundamental good in our community. And lastly, I would say again that it's just so critical to steward all your donors, and not just your major donors, but look at newcomers or younger donors. Are you connecting with them in a way that will resonate with them, because they're your future? And of course, to steward your legacy donors, if you know about them, not just because it's important to maintain them as a legacy donor, but because they're often increasing their current and annual giving at the same time. So those are a few things that I think the pandemic has shone a spotlight on and highlighted that there's a real need for.
Well, in the same vein, I think certainly I'd like to know whether, from your perspective, whether the pandemic revealed some sort of fundamental weaknesses in the traditional forms of fundraising that the sector has utilized in the past. And are there, you've touched on these, but new strategies and new ways to think about engaging philanthropic instincts among the Canadians and to encourage donors to think about their long-term planning and really embracing different models for the long term?
Well, I mean, I think there was an incredible amount of innovation out there in terms of, particularly from those charities that were really struck by the pandemic. If a lot of their fundraising was happening in a very event-based way, as an example, or for those charities, particularly the arts, right, where they're reliant on engagement with the public for their financial sustainability. And we saw a lot of them get really creative around how to continue to have events, how to continue to engage with the public when they weren't allowed to be in those sort of high touch situations. And so I think those kinds of ways, again, are ways of demonstrating what your organization is doing and the difference it's making in your community and how you connect with your donors or your public, the kinds of stories that you tell about your organization. So I think it really presented some great opportunities for that. At CAGP, one, I would just say too, that for us, education is really cornerstone. We tend to connect more so with fundraisers or professional advisors who are connecting with donors. So we're a little downstream from donors, although we do talk to donors and Canadians in our Willpower campaign. And I know we're going to talk about that in a minute. But our education has traditionally been really high touch, in person, and lots of interaction. And we got really creative in facilitating that through virtual platforms, like facilitating small group conversations and perhaps having shorter sessions over multiple days rather than a lengthy education session, and maybe providing homework and group work in between. And the feedback for us is that it's been really tremendous. So there's lots of ways to learn and gain important professional development around fundraising as well. And so some of that, I think were mechanisms that our clients, our members, pulled into their own fundraising at the community level.
Well, I'd like to talk about Willpower. I understand it was a public education to inspire Canadians to think differently about charitable giving. What impact did you see that had?
Well, I'm excited to talk about Willpower. We're incredibly excited about this campaign. It's just in its second year. And in year one, we only piloted it in one community. But the pandemic really inspired us to accelerate our rollout of the campaign. So in year two, which is like right now, we rolled it out across the whole country. And the message of the campaign was really just too important not to use the opportunity of the pandemic to amplify as people were really listening. So our goal is to normalize Canadians leaving a gift to a charity in a will. Right now, about 5% of Canadians are leaving a gift to a charity in their will, but about 13% have said that they would consider doing so. Now, it might be a bit premature to say we've had an impact, but our goal is to move that 5% to 8.5% over 10 years. And if we do that, and we think that we can do that because we are emulating a campaign that is about 15 years old in the UK. And those are the kinds of numbers that they saw when they were at a very similar position as we are in Canada right now. So moving it from 5% to 8.5% over 10 years would result in about an additional $40 billion in money to the sector. And that's new money, Mary, because it's not just I was giving here and now I'm giving there. This is people who were not giving and now they're giving through their will. And I think what is really compelling about our message, because we know that a big barrier for people to leaving a gift in their will is the feeling or the desire to ensure your loved ones are taken care of. And the key message in our campaign is to show people that they can do both, that they can support a cause they care about, the environment, the arts, maybe their local hospice where their parent passed away, but they can also take care of their family. And we provide tools that show how to do that and demonstrate that ability. And then we connect them with a financial advisor or an estate planner who can turn that into a reality. So, planned giving is a 10 to 15 year runway. So are we going to see, change in that? And of course, only about 1 in 10 people actually let the charity know that they have left a gift in their will to their charity. So, we'll see this coming to fruition within the next 10 to 15 years. That's why we set that really long runway. But I can tell you that the interest that we've had in the campaign has been tremendous, both in terms of charities that are directly participating, but the kind of statistics we're seeing around impressions of the campaign and how the campaign is being visualized by Canadians. So we're very pleased with the outcome of the campaign, and excited to have something that is speaking directly to Canadians on an issue that I think there's a tremendous amount of interest in, and for people to see that, this as a collective, as a movement, can be utterly transformative for the charitable sector. So it's very, very exciting.
Well, I imagine that campaigns like this one are going to be really, truly essential to bringing in the Gen X, the millennials, and ultimately the Gen Z to think about planned giving and to even turn their mind to these things when they become to the level of maturity where they actually take those steps and actually draft a will.
Absolutely. And one of the I guess kind of the communities that we're working with in the Willpower campaign is the increasing prevalence of online will writing. And, the jury's still out for many as to whether that's an effective mechanism. But I think where it is potentially impactful for the sector is that these are strategies and tools for people who are younger and want to have a will, but they have a pretty basic estate, nothing too complex. And, they don't have lots of assets in different pots, and maybe they don't have a lot of kids, or maybe they don't have, extended families and that sort of thing. So it can be a really great opportunity for young people to see the importance of having a will, and for us to embed at an early age. When you're pulling your will together, think about the causes that you want to take care of and are meaningful to you in your estate plan. And so I think great opportunity there. We're also in dialogue and work with Imagine Canada, and they're really interested in a more current sense in speaking to millennial audiences. And so we're pleased to, kind of partner with Imagine Canada where it makes sense for their interests and our Willpower campaign to kind of intersect and, have a complementary message.
Well, it's so interesting how the digitization of life generally is impacting even estate planning and wills, and coming with that is that engagement of that younger generation. So fascinating. We're seeing that despite Canada's being so responsive and embraced vaccinations, that the Delta variant and other sort of variants of concern could really keep the pandemic with us for some time to come. And I'm curious about what your best advice is for organizations and charities to get through this from your lens at the Canadian Association of Gift Planners. And then maybe you could give some words of advice to potential donors out there who might be at a stage where they're thinking about their gift planning.
Exactly. And I think, this longer, more sustainable source of funding for sectors for charities is so aligned with what CAGP does, because it's about planning now for very much in the future, and connecting with your donors and building relationships with your donors, including gifts and wills, in thinking about your charitable giving in a more longitudinal sense. And that's why we tend to use language like gift planning, charitable gift planning at CAGP, as opposed to planned giving, because we want to make it almost analogous to wealth planning and estate planning, which is very much seen as a long-term, a visionary thing. So we're talking about, philanthropic conversations now that pay off with philanthropic gifts later. And so investing in it now, and having that long-term vision, I think, is really, really important. It behooves us at CAGP to equip our members with the information and the data and the case so that they can go to the senior leaders, boards, and CEOs in their organizations and ensure that they see this long-term opportunity for gift planning, and they can invest the resources in a gift planning program now that is long-term. And then the message to donors, again, I think, is working with a financial advisor or an estate planner or your accountant and saying, hey, I'm really interested in being philanthropic. I know a lot of professional advisors are very much talking about the tax advantages of charitable giving, and that's very much part of the equation. But I think we tell financial advisors and professional advisors, connect with your clients around their values around giving. It'll be an opportunity for you to get to know them, build a relationship with your client, and then support your client on their philanthropic journey over the course of their lifetime. And that includes current gifts, but maybe it includes more strategic gifts. We just received a donation at our CAGP Foundation from a longtime member who sold the family cottage and was facing a tax bill, and he thought, I can make a big gift to the CAGP Foundation that's going to help me offset some of the tax implications of an event like that. And so as you think about your community and you think about your values as an individual, as a donor, and you think about the story that you want to tell about your life over the course of your life, up to and including your estate giving, it can be a really, really powerful mechanism for you to add value and meaning to your life and to make a difference in your community, and to also, in a family context, showcase those values to your children and build that future generation of philanthropy. So what we do at CAGP, and what I love about CAGP, is just how it's about bringing meaning to our lives in a very longitudinal way, and also having an impact on the community and building the kinds of communities that we want to have, and our role as individuals in doing that.
It's so fascinating to talk to you about the work that the Canadian Association of Gift Planners does, and this whole way of thinking about philanthropy and philanthropy from a long-term lens. So Ruth, thank you for sharing with our audience your insights and how organizations can build a more sustainable funding strategy for the future. You gave me a lot to think about, and I certainly appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much, Mary. Really, really enjoyed the conversation.